A warm welcome to the Art Garage, to those on Zoom, and to our guest in studio audience. The Art Garage, in its 11th year of serving the area and having the honor to exhibit some of the amazing, highly original artists who keep moving to our beautiful rural area. This is the land of the Mohawk, their traditional hunting and fishing grounds, who are part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The Art Garage is open 7 days a week, a phone call or a text, and we do have regular hours on Saturdays. We represent 2 artist estates, farmer artist Laverne Kelly and Alice Hudson, whose work can mainly be seen at the Mingan Museum in San Diego. This year, her work is on exhibit in Norwich. We couldn't do what we do without the help of a great many people. I particularly would like to thank Robert Seward and Katie Homans, who jumps in to help make our beautiful flyers. And I also am grateful to Lillian Voorhees, our consultant installation person. This program today is made possible with our tech host, Julia Miller in Brooklyn, and Sarah Alden, videographer. The Midwinter show, as you can see, began in the cold of winter, and I'm sorry to report it is still quite chilly. Other artists in the show included Lucia Phillips, self-taught artist, Amy Lee McKinnon, and Elizabeth Niels, another veteran luminati. Marcus is a Californian originally, another transplanted artist, a gift to the cultural landscape of Otsego County, well established in Gilbertsville in partnership with Elizabeth Niels. A Californian for much of his life, his skills in 2- and 3-dimensional art were recognized at an early age. When in high school, he took Saturday classes. The LA County Museum exhibited his ceramics in the 1950s. The legendary ceramic sculpture pioneer Peter Boltus awarded him Best of Show in Sculpture in a Sacramento Arts and Crafts show. More recently, he was awarded Best of Show in the Colorado exhibition in Grand Junction. While serving in the Navy, Marcus was the station artist. Following that, with the support of the GI Bill, which was available to people like Marcus, he studied at the Chouinard Art Institute, now Cal Arts. He worked in production pottery before studying at Otis Institute, where he earned his BFA and MA. Marcus continued teaching and exhibiting at many venues and engaged in partnerships with myriad entities, production facilities, private art schools, city and state colleges. Marcus moved to upstate New York in 2012. He has exhibited his work locally at the Smithy, the Cooperstown Art Association, and in Oneonta at SUNY and Kano galleries. His current projects include creating gigantic singing heads, for which we have one model in the show. Marcus, thank you so much for agreeing to talk about your work today. Marcus, thank you. Take it away.
Hello, my name is Marcus Villagran. The several sculptures this show made here in New York and in California. Today I'm talking about Pacific Northwest and early work here in Gilbertsville at my Dunderberg Gallery. Sydney Waller has been kind to add Pacific Northwest to her Zoom collection. We will be revealing the lives of Indians in British Columbia on this sculpture. and Alaska from hundreds of years in the past. These are primitive tales. Surrealist invention by Andre Breton was a result of desperate search for an alternative to our violently decaying civilization. The great revolutions in our world deceived almost all who believed in them. Perhaps only surrealism, devised and kept afloat by a small group of poets and artists dedicated to the re-enchantment of the world, has retained its early promise. Its goal was the overthrow of civilized reason, convention, religion, and tradition. Today, above all, the visual art of the red man that lets us accede to a new system of knowledge and relations. That was said by Andre Breton in 1946. This is a conversation with a Tsimshian, Voyage Around the World, recorded in 1827 by Adalberto di Chamisso. The Tsimshian was in his smokehouse, hung with fillets of red salmon. The Indian, having explained the origins of his family, asked me whether in Europe we also had ancestors like his that fought monsters. I recounted some of the exploits of our mythical heroes, adding that they often fought to rescue women who were being held captive or who monsters were threatening to eat. The Indian wanted to know whether the women subsequently gave birth to monsters, and he shook his head when I told him that none of them had sexual relationships with their captors. I explained the original meaning of our myths had become garbled. Only a few details of these deeds of valor have withstood the distortions of time. It could well be that these rescued virgins had the same character as the female ancestors of the Indians. Your minotaurs, your dragons, and your sea monsters, the Indian said, you must be former totems. For a woman to be carried away by them was, as for you, not simply a fearful thing, but also a great honor. Didn't you tell me that this kind of adventure usually happened to princesses? Just so for us. The monster always chose noble women. Nemax, who was carried off by a frog, was of royal blood. She lived for many years at the bottom of a lake, and when her brothers forced her to reemerge, they found her covered with tiny frogs that came out of her eyes, her mouth, and her breasts. She asked to be put to death, but begged her family to spare her frog children. I asked whether the women after such adventures were always sacrificed. Not always, he told me. Our answer, Hippisan, did not come to this tragic end. She lived a long time with a bear, and her children were bear cubs with human hands. Sometimes the monster himself destroyed the abducted woman, but this was the case with Kegehet and his victim. But quite often they came back and continued their normal lives. In the history of the Garamanes family, there was the answer. In the history of the Garamanes family, their ancestor was walking on the beach when she was carried off by a fish, and her husband searched everywhere. Finally discovered her in the depths of the clear water. surrounded by little fishes. Her children, he managed to get her back, and the couple returned their normal life as if nothing had happened. That husband was very proud of the fact that his wife had had a relationship with a magic animal. Another woman carried off by an eagle came home again, bearing a nest on her head. But often the stolen woman perished and the animal totem was killed. Curiously, the latter never held it against its vanquishers. Sometimes before dying, the monster speaks, as Hafner does in your story of Sigurd. Sometimes it predicts the future or teaches the Indians magic songs. Then the Tsimshian asked me whether we had totems in Europe at that moment. I believe as you do, I answered, that we had totems a very long time ago, but these paradise totems have fled into the armorial bearings of families and later into those of towns and countries. In the canton of Uri in Switzerland, whose coat of arms is the head of a bull, the standard bearer used to wear the skin of this animal when he led troops into battle. Doesn't that remind you of your Indians who in similar conditions wore the emblems of their totems? And in the town of Bern, whose coat of arms is marked with a bear, they kept these animals in a pit. The citizens believed it brings them good luck. However, apart from their presence on coats of arms, true totems have disappeared in Europe. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or maybe focus more on the sculpture at hand. I don't know.
Why don't we do a very slow rotation of this, what I call your masterpiece?
This way. Right. This is the
Very
side
slow.
that describes the frog and the princess.
I love it that you see the armature bits of wood and plastic. Both pieces are the same theme, right?
The total work is the same theme of the Indian.
What I meant is I can see the frogs on one and I can see the bear on another, but both like leaves are of the same.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The leaves facing the central jar.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I see. Mm-hmm. What is the significance of any of the jar, the vessels? I mean,
Well, they all have a continuation of the story. They all show, for example, in this case, the bear is has a description, literal words written, and the jar of the fish, there's actually a picture of her returning to her husband in the woods. But all of them have both the rape of the Indian and the outcome, which was that the animals took off or they stayed behind.
So we have a question from the chat. It is, Marcus, what drew you to the Northwest and the Indians there? How long have you been working on this sequence?
About 8 years ago, I went to Vancouver and they had a surrealism show. Vancouver was one of the focuses of the Indians. The Indians had a forest of totems in that area early on, before Vancouver became a city. So the area decided that they would have a surrealist show, and it was in that show that the records of Tsimshian in his smokehouse were recorded and I found that description in the catalog of the show at Vancouver Museum of Fine Art. And that work is still available, the catalog to that Vancouver show. It's called The Color of Dreams. And it's a beautiful book. And as Frank Lloyd Wright and a lot of the modern artists, Jackson Pollock said that his favorite surrealists were Picasso and Miro. And both those people remained in Europe, unlike most of the surrealists who came to New York. So you have a kind of a problem because the idea of losing a thread of the surrealist ideal. And if you remember what I said regarding their ideal, it was to completely forget the civilization that we had created that was destroying people. The great revolutions deceived almost all who believed in them. Perhaps only surrealism devised and kept afloat by a small group of poets and artists dedicated to the re-enchantment of the world. The re-enchantment of the world has retained its early promise. Its goal was the overthrow of civilized reason, convention, religion, and tradition. Today, it's above all the visual art of the red man that lets us accede to a new system of knowledge and relations. And that was the leader of the surrealist, Andre Breton.
We have another question, which is, do you consider these vessels to be like totems?
The word totem is used by Sigmund Freud in his book, Totem. We can study the period from the 20s to the 40s and discover there was a lot of similarity in the philosophy and the psychology. But basically, we became much too immersed in power. And that's where we are today. And it's no mistake that we're still exercising power to overcome our real problems. And it's up to us. We can study natives of hundreds of years ago and perhaps find our way back to nature.
I have a question. This is Majolica, which we rarely see here. Can you discuss the...
Okay, Majolica is a term used, and it began in the Mediterranean, and it was a process fired at a lower temperature so that the colors of the oxides used to create the colors mature. The process is to first make the shape out of the clay that is used in Majolica, which is basically a low fire clay. And then after it's bisque fired, it's coated with another layer of white. And that white has to be fired exactly right, or pinholes appear. You can see in my work that there are pinholes, but that's because in that certain area during the firing, the oxides were disturbed. So after the white coat is applied, then one goes over it with the oxides and the colors, and the detail can be written in very easily with oxide pencils. So I've used oxide pencils as well as brushing liberally like watercolor. So it's irresistible to make these things wild and detailed.
The drawing is so beautiful.
So the drawing becomes irresistible. It's quite different than the other pieces that I have in the show. They're all fired to stoneware, like that one on the counter over here, and this one close by. These were all stoneware fired pieces, and they're all in the theme of astronauts. So there was a leap in faith from the Indians and the astronauts.
You mentioned that your name is Villagran, is of Mexican origin.
It's
or
a
is there
Spanish name from
Spanish?
the area of Segovia. It's pronounced Villagran. The LL is yeah,
Beautiful.
Villagran. Yeah, my father was an optical man who invented the corneal lens that people use today. And he developed all the machinery that built the lenses and became very well known. But the ideas were quickly used by corporations, and today they have developed lenses to much finer quality.
We have another question here, which is, are you going to continue this series or are you starting in a different direction? What are you working on now?
My latest piece is exhibited in the gallery. It is a group of drawings that my companion Elizabeth Niels drew some time ago, and I copied her drawings into a 4-foot tall standing group of 3 dancers. It's called Song and Dance, and it's in my gallery now. The example of a portrait singing head that is over here against the wall
Behind you.
Represents the first model of the large pieces that I've made, which are singers. Basically, Tanika Gibson is the model for that first piece, which is now on display in my gallery. It's called Tanika Gibson.
Is that the one on the porch?
Yes,
that
it
sings,
is.
that is wired. So
Yes,
you hear
it's
this.
wired so that she sings Summertime. And
It's
whenever the
stunning.
gallery is open,
Great.
it sings Summertime. Then, of course, all winter, few people came by to listen to Summertime, but nevertheless, it was available. We had it available. Summertime was always in the Dunderberg Gallery.
Marcus, you brought this quite stunning
Oh, yes.
bowl.
This has a Majolica portrait of one of the Indian masks, and it's a popular one. But most of the actual pieces of the Pacific Northwest, even the totem poles, have been moved to collections around the world, and you'll find them in many different private collections. Of course, if you follow the work of Picasso, you'll know he borrowed heavily from African art, and other artists have too. In the collection of painters that we've showed in this Zoom show, you'll find that there are some really unusual oil paintings. They're all in reference to the beliefs of the surrealists.
Thank you. Are there other questions from our studio live audience.
This piece was painted and realized a long time ago because I was reading that catalog. And so the ideas evolved very slowly, but the actual function of the surrealists to try and alter people's thinking about nature and the people that lived strictly in nature and never thought of destroying each other the way they were.
I must know the woman is racing away
To catch her
who is that?
husband. Her husband they're being reunited.
She has escaped
Yes.
the fish.
She escaped the fish king.
So there she is.
Yes.
Racing towards
Yeah.
this man with his arms outstretched.
And there's a little cabin behind. And here we have the cub with human hands, which is a stretch of the imagination only to come from thousands of years of native people living in that place in Alaska, which is the pathway of 25,000 years of people moving away from their problems, away from their nature, away from winter, looking for a warm place to live. Well, we're all going to have a warm place to live soon.
Oh dear.
And we should just be so lucky as to be around for it.
Yes.
Well, your other theme of astronauts is also about travel, so to speak.
Yeah, it's irresistible. But you see, clay is a very powerful medium. And if you throw enough and experiment enough and pull it apart and put it back together again, you can find anything. Remember, the Indians here believed their God was the unconscious. Their dreams led them to wherever they went, and to whatever enemies they would find, they would share. The Indians in the British Columbia, had a tradition of where they gave their copper, which was the most precious thing they had. And if they did not achieve what they wanted, they would throw it into the ocean.
Question. What sparked your interest in astronauts? How does this interest connect with your interest in the Pacific Northwest?
Well, we aren't single-minded in our life in this place. It so happens that I grew up in Hollywood. So I was exposed to just about any concept of human endeavor that you could possibly imagine, because they were selling their ideas. And so I got swept up like everyone else. It so happens that in Pasadena, they were developing the outer space travel, and an area in California called Palmdale is the landing place for rocket ships to outer space. To the moon, for example, had an alternative landing space. The outer space recovery lander could land in Palmdale. So that's another place to go, the Mojave Desert.
Fabulous. Don't you have 10 acres in the desert?
Oh, you know about that.
I think
Yes.
so.
Yes, I'm called Mojave Marcus,
Okay.
because there's going to be all-weather sculptures showing up there in a little corner of the road to the ski resort and the Priory, which is on the road, and it's a really beautiful place if you like the desert. Gets warm in the summer, but nevertheless,
Oh, man.
people love the space. And our property is going to be absolutely untouched except for the sculpture. I will have to have a chain link fence up, but we'll keep you posted.
Thank you. We look forward to that. Marcus, thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
For
and
this
thank
was
you.
really wonderful. And this show will be up through April 5. And we are open this Saturday, April 2, from 11 to 1, and every day with a phone call. And the next exhibition is Communities Across Continents, featuring Adam Masaba from Kenya
No.
and some other upstate artists
Right.
identifying their communities. So please come to that opening Saturday, April 9.
And just remember, these are magic people. They're bringing their subconscious to you. You'll
Yes.
find it nowhere else in life, except in the paintings and the sculpture of fine artists.
Thank you. We are artists. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you, Zoom audience across the country. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.